have taken poison.
Courtrooms are supposed to be places of order. They're designed to settle disputes, deliver justice, and maintain control. But every so often, something goes terribly wrong.
The Southern Kentucky security officer ended up in the hospital after he says a man assaulted him in a courthouse.
He's charged with killing the judge presiding over the trial, a court reporter, a deputy sheriff.
In those moments, the carefully constructed facade of civility collapses.
She fired 6 shots straight into Klaus Grabowski's back.
And desperation, rage, or madness takes over. What happens when defendants decide they have nothing left to lose? David Paradiso, the courtroom attack. David Paradiso's path to infamy began in December 2006 when he was arrested for the murder of his girlfriend, Eileen Pelt. Their relationship had lasted only a few weeks before tragedy struck in the backseat of a car driven by David's mother, Deborah. In a brutal and sudden act, David stabbed Eileen in the neck. His explanation was chilling. He claimed that if he didn't kill her first, she would take his life. There was no evidence to support this claim, just the words of a man who had just committed murder. What followed was equally disturbing. David forced his mother to drive him from Lodi, California to a remote location 15 miles away in Amador County, where he dumped Eileen's body along a roadside. The callousness of the act stunned investigators. This wasn't a crime of passion that ended in immediate remorse. It was calculated, cold, and showed a disturbing detachment from reality. David's defense team tried to explain his actions by claiming he was under the influence of methamphetamine at the time of the murder, but that defense would only carry them so far. By 2009, David was on trial for his life, and the proceedings were about to take a turn that no one in that courtroom could have predicted. In the weeks leading up to the trial, Deborah Paradiso became deeply concerned about her son's mental state. She noticed signs of a breakdown, a sorrow in his eyes that suggested something far worse than guilt. She also believed he might have a weapon. She reported her suspicions to authorities, who searched his holding cell but found nothing. Her concerns were dismissed, a decision that would haunt everyone involved. During the trial in March 2009, David took the stand and testified about Eileen's death, but this time, his story changed. He abandoned the self-defense narrative and said something far more disturbing. He claimed he killed Eileen because she deserved to die. The shift in his account was both bizarre and deeply unsettling. It suggested a mind that was either unraveling or had been broken for some time. At one point during the proceedings, Deborah left the courtroom in tears. She had opposed her son taking the stand, fearing what might happen given his deteriorating mental health. Judge Cinda Fox, presiding over the case, called for a brief recess. It was during this pause that David made his move. He stood up, walked behind Judge Fox, and attacked her with a sharp object. No one had seen it coming. He stabbed her repeatedly and struck her physically as well. Several people in the courtroom tried to intervene, but it was Lodi Detective Eric Bradley who ended the assault. He drew his weapon and shot David Paradiso. Judge Fox was rushed to the hospital on a stretcher. She survived her injuries and eventually recovered. David Paradiso did not. He died from the gunshot wounds. The aftermath was filled with grief and anger. David's family, particularly his mother and brother Aaron, were devastated. Aaron later stated that David suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, a diagnosed condition that had been ignored. He argued that his brother should never have been allowed to testify in his mental state, and that the tragedy could have been prevented if authorities had taken Deborah's warnings seriously. Klaus Grabowski, a mother's vengeance. Klaus Grabowski was a known criminal in Germany long before the events that would make him infamous. He had been arrested for strangling a child and was given probation, a lenient sentence that sent a dangerous message. A few years later, he was arrested again for crimes involving children. This time, the authorities were not as forgiving. But Grabowski's worst act was still ahead of him, and it would lead to one of the most shocking moments ever captured in a courtroom. Marianne Bach's life had been difficult from the start. Born in 1950 in West Germany, she grew up with a violent father and a mother who abandoned her as a teenager. She became a mother herself at 16, but had to give up her first child for adoption. At 18, she had another child, but was forced to give that one up as well after being assaulted just before giving birth. On November 14, 1977, she gave birth to her third child, a daughter named Anna. This time, she was determined to keep her. Raising Anna alone was hard. Marianne worked long hours as a waitress, often leaving Anna to fend for herself. Friends noticed that the young girl frequently looked after herself, sometimes even sleeping at the bar where her mother worked. It wasn't an ideal childhood, but Marianne was doing the best she could under difficult circumstances. On May 5, 1980, Marianne and Anna had a heated argument before Anna was supposed to leave for school. Upset and heartbroken, the 7-year-old decided not to go. Instead, she encountered Klaus Grabowski, a neighbor in their apartment complex. He offered to let her play with his cats in his apartment. Anna, still upset from the fight with her mother, agreed. Once Anna was inside, Grabowski assaulted her for hours. When he was finished, he strangled her with his fiancée's tights and killed her. His fiancée discovered what had happened and immediately called the police. Officers found Anna's body at the edge of a canal. Grabowski was arrested without incident. The trial began on March 3, 1981. Grabowski's defense was as despicable as his crime. He claimed that Anna had tried to seduce him, that she had demanded money, and that she had threatened to expose him if he didn't comply. He painted himself as the victim, blaming a 7-year-old girl for her own murder. It was a disgusting display of cowardice and manipulation. Marianne Bach sat in the courtroom and listened to this man lie about her daughter. She had already endured unbearable pain, and now she was forced to watch as her child's memory was dragged through the mud. She made a decision. On March 6, 1981, Marianne returned to court with a .22 caliber Beretta pistol hidden beneath her clothing. When Grabowski appeared, she acted without hesitation. She fired 7 shots. 6 of them hit him. Grabowski died almost immediately. Video footage of the shooting showed Marianne's calm, emotionless demeanor as she fired. Even when others rushed to restrain her, she showed no regret. She had done what she came to do, and she accepted the consequences. Marianne was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 6 years in prison. She served only 3. In 1996, she died of pancreatic cancer and was buried next to her daughter, Anna. Slobodan Praljak, poison in The Hague. Slobodan Praljak was born in Yugoslavia in 1945. He lived what seemed like a fairly normal life, becoming a professor and running an electronics business. But when the Croatian War of Independence broke out in 1991, his life changed. He joined the Croatian military and rose to the rank of general. During the conflict, he held a prominent position, but his leadership allegedly included war crimes. Attacks on religious buildings, looting, and assaults on civilians were reported under his command. He also oversaw a detention camp where Bosniak men were subjected to brutality and abuse. After the war ended in 1995, Praljak returned to civilian life. He started several businesses, including a production company and a tobacco company. He also wrote 25 books. On the surface, it seemed like he was trying to move on. But in the early 2000s, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia brought war crimes charges against him and 5 others. Praljak surrendered to authorities and was indicted on serious charges, including violations of the Geneva Conventions, violations of the laws and customs of war, and crimes against humanity. The tribunal argued that Praljak either ordered these crimes or knew about them and did nothing to stop them. The trial began in April 2006 and lasted about 7 years. In 2013, Praljak was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He appealed, insisting he was innocent. In November 2017, a court in The Hague upheld portions of his sentence while dismissing others. His 20-year sentence remained unchanged. He had already served around 13 years, leaving him with 7 more to go before release. Praljak, however, was not willing to accept the verdict. After the judge finished reading the decision, he stood up and made a shocking statement. He said, "I just drank poison." He had consumed a liquid from a small brown bottle he brought with him into the courtroom. The judge immediately ordered the curtains drawn, and Praljak was rushed to the hospital. He died shortly after from heart failure. The incident raised serious questions. How did he get poison into the courthouse? Security checks at the tribunal were stringent, making it extremely difficult to smuggle anything inside. Despite thorough investigations, the source of the poison was never discovered. Some speculated that he had help, while others believed he had been planning this for some time and had found a way to conceal the substance. Praljak's death prompted mixed reactions. Some former judges at the tribunal saw it as a tragedy, arguing that it denied justice to the victims of war crimes. Others viewed it as a final act of defiance, a man refusing to accept the consequences of his actions. Whatever the interpretation, Praljak's death left a complicated legacy and a series of unanswered questions. Siale Angelau, the pen attack. Siale Angelau's story is one of miscommunication, violence, and fatal consequences. Not much is known about his early life, but what is clear is that he had ties to the Tongan Crip Gang, a criminal organization with operations across the United States, as well as in New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. In 2014, Angelau, then 25 years old, was named in a 29-count racketeering indictment targeting 17 gang members. The case against him was serious, involving allegations of organized crime and violent offenses. But what makes Angelau's case particularly notable is what happened during his trial, not the charges themselves. First, the trial took place in a newly built courthouse that had only been open for a week. Second, there was a critical breakdown in communication between the presiding judge and the U.S. Marshal responsible for Angelau's presence in the courtroom. Defendants are typically restrained during court proceedings to prevent any attempts to harm others. Marshals are informed in advance whether a defendant is shackled or not. In this case, the new courthouse lacked certain standard features, such as table coverings that would have indicated Angelau's unrestrained status. As a result, several marshals were unaware that he was not secured. Angelau took advantage of this oversight. As a witness took the stand to testify, Angelau grabbed a pen from the table in front of him and lunged at the witness. A court-martial immediately shouted for him to drop the pen. The witness managed to escape by running to safety, and several people in the courtroom rushed to intervene. But the situation escalated quickly. The court-martial in charge drew his weapon and fired 4 shots into Angelau's chest. Angelau was rushed to the hospital but died from his injuries. The marshal was not identified publicly and faced no charges for his actions. The incident was deemed a necessary response to an immediate threat. However, Angelau's family saw it differently. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the marshal and the U.S. Marshals Service, arguing that the use of force was excessive. Their attorney, Robert Sykes, claimed that the final 3 shots were fired after Angelau was already on the ground, making them unnecessary. The case received national attention, and in 2018 a court ordered the release of the shooting footage to the public, ending a 4-year period during which the video had remained sealed. Judge Dale Kimball reviewed the footage and disagreed with the family's argument. He ruled that Angelau was clearly attempting to attack the witness and that the marshal's actions were justified to prevent harm. The case was dismissed, and the family chose not to appeal. The matter gradually faded from public view. Brian Nichols, the Atlanta courthouse rampage. Brian Nichols was born in 1971 and had a difficult upbringing. He came from a broken home and had several run-ins with the law. Despite these challenges, he graduated from high school and briefly attended college. But his life took a darker turn as he became involved in illegal activities, particularly drug-related offenses. By 2005, he was facing trial in Fulton County, Georgia. On the morning of March 11, 2005, Nichols was being escorted to the Fulton County Courthouse in downtown Atlanta for his trial. What should have been a routine transfer turned into one of the most violent episodes in American courtroom history. Nichols overpowered a deputy sheriff, took her gun, and shot her. He then made his way to the courtroom where his trial was supposed to take place. Inside, he shot and killed Judge Roland Barnes and court reporter Julie Brandau. After committing these murders, Nichols fled the courthouse, sparking a massive manhunt that gripped the city of Atlanta and made national headlines. For the next 26 hours, Nichols went on a rampage. He carjacked vehicles, shot a federal agent, and took a woman hostage in her own apartment. Law enforcement agencies across the region mobilized to capture him, but he managed to evade them for more than a day. The boldness and brutality of his actions left the city in fear. The rampage finally ended when Nichols, still holding his hostage, made an unexpected decision. He released her unharmed and surrendered to police. The reasons for his sudden capitulation remain unclear. Some believe he had a change of heart, while others think he simply realized that capture was inevitable. Nichols's trial for the courthouse murders began in 2008 and was closely watched by the media. His defense team initially argued that he was insane at the time of the killings, but the jury was not convinced. In November 2008, he was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The Atlanta courthouse shooting raised serious concerns about security in courthouses across the country. How had Nichols been able to overpower a deputy and obtain a firearm inside a secure facility? In the aftermath, many courthouses implemented stricter security measures to prevent similar tragedies. The case also highlighted issues related to mental health and the criminal justice system. Nichols's defense argued that he was not in his right mind, raising questions about how the system evaluates and treats individuals with mental health problems. Michael Marin, the arson verdict, death. Michael Marin's life began with all the hallmarks of success. He earned a degree from Brigham Young University and a law degree from Yale, then went on to work for prestigious Wall Street firms like Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, and Salomon Brothers. His career brought him enormous wealth. He owned multiple luxury properties and an art collection that included works by Picasso. He even climbed Mount Everest in the early 2000s. On the surface, he was living the American dream. But by the late 2000s, Marin's financial situation had deteriorated. He fell behind on mortgage payments for his $2.5 million home in Phoenix, Arizona. Desperate to save his property, he tried various schemes, including attempting to raffle it off at a charity event. None of them worked. His desperation deepened, and eventually, it drove him to commit a bizarre and reckless crime. On July 5, 2009, Marin's house caught fire. When firefighters arrived, they found the former Wall Street broker emerging from the flames dressed in full scuba diving gear. The scene was surreal. Why would someone use scuba equipment to escape a house fire? Marin had staged the fire in an attempt to collect insurance money and pay off his debts. He set the fire in 4 separate locations around the house, using phone books to ensure it spread quickly. He wore the diving gear so he could breathe while escaping through the smoke. On paper, the plan might have seemed clever. In practice, it fell apart almost immediately. Investigators quickly determined that the fire had been intentionally set. The diving gear was an obvious red flag. Who keeps a fully equipped scuba suit in their bedroom, ready to use in case of fire? The evidence was overwhelming, and Marin was charged with arson and attempted insurance fraud. His trial began in May 2012, and the stakes were high. If convicted, he faced a prison sentence ranging from 7 to 21 years. On June 28, 2012, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty. Marin's reaction was captured on video. He appeared visibly distressed, his face turned red, and he reached into his pocket. He pulled something out and put it in his mouth, then drank from a water bottle. Moments later, he collapsed. Panic erupted in the courtroom as people rushed to help him, but their efforts were futile. Marin was taken to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Authorities later determined that he had ingested cyanide. How he obtained it and smuggled it into the courtroom remains unclear. The case raised questions about courthouse security and how someone facing serious charges could bring a lethal substance into a controlled environment. Courtroom security and its failures. The cases of David Paradiso, Ciali Angelou, Brian Nichols, and Michael Marin all exposed serious flaws in courthouse security. These were not random acts of violence in uncontrolled environments. They happened in courtrooms, places specifically designed to maintain order and safety. So how did these incidents occur? In David Paradiso's case, his mother had warned authorities that her son might have a weapon. A search of his holding cell turned up nothing, and her concerns were dismissed. But Paradiso still managed to obtain a sharp object and attack Judge Fox. The failure to take his deteriorating mental health seriously contributed to the tragedy. Ciali Angelou's attack on a witness happened because of a communication breakdown. Marshals were not informed that he was unrestrained, and the new courthouse lacked visual cues that would have alerted them to his status. The result was a violent attack that ended with Angelou being shot and killed. Brian Nichols overpowered a deputy and took her weapon, then went on a deadly rampage inside the courthouse. The incident raised questions about how deputies are trained to handle dangerous defendants and whether security protocols were sufficient to prevent such an attack. Michael Marin's death highlighted another kind of security failure. He was able to bring cyanide into a courtroom and ingest it after being convicted. How he obtained the substance and smuggled it past security remains a mystery. In the years since these incidents, many courthouses have implemented stricter security measures. Metal detectors, enhanced screening procedures, and better training for court personnel have become standard in many jurisdictions. But challenges remain. Courthouses are public spaces, and balancing security with accessibility is an ongoing struggle. Defendants, witnesses, and members of the public need to feel safe, but overly restrictive measures can create their own problems. The question of mental health also looms large. Several of the individuals involved in these cases showed clear signs of psychological distress, yet the system failed to address those issues in time. Better mental health evaluations and interventions could potentially prevent some of these tragedies. But resources are often limited, and the legal system is not always equipped to handle defendants with severe mental health problems. These cases serve as a reminder that courtrooms, despite all their rules and procedures, are not immune to violence. They are places where lives hang in the balance, and sometimes that pressure becomes too much to bear.